This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today we spend the rest of the hour remembering the pioneering author, journalist, filmmaker, media reform activist Danny Schechter. He died last Thursday of pancreatic cancer at the age of 72. Danny got his start and his famous moniker, the News Dissector, on Boston's WBCN radio in the 70s. Fans of the show include Noam Chomsky, who told Common Dreams, quote, "No one was in Boston during the days of Danny Schechter, your News Dissector, can ever forget the exhilaration of those marvelous broadcasts, their enlightenment and insight and humor, often in dark days, a legacy that Danny left behind him when he went on to a remarkable career of critical analysis and breaking through media and doctrinal barriers," Chomsky said. This is a clip from the biopic, A Work in Progress, Danny Schechter and Journalism of Change, chronicling a media life in the trenches from the 60s to 60. Danny Schechter explains how he got his nickname.
I got involved in the underground newspaper movement, and from there, by accident and by chance, I got an opportunity to work at WBCN Radio, and later, when the news director left, took his job. Well, I love that dirty water. Oh, Boston, you're my home.
The radio on WBCN Boston.
This is your News Dissector, Danny Schechter. I became the News Dissector when one of the DJs who I was writing the news for told me he couldn't read what I had written and I should read it myself. And then he had to go to the toilet. So I was thrown on the air and he introduced me. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the News Inspector, the News Digester, the News Dissector. News Dissector, that sounded pretty unique and good, so I basically latched onto it, and I'm still known as the News Dissector in journalism all around the world, and now write a blog under that name.
Insists that the Watergate exposures prove the validity of the American system, which is like saying that medicine proves the validity of disease, that radiation proves the validity of cancer. To make a just society requires more than punishment of wrongdoers, not indictments, not resignations, not even an impeachment can do that. Watergate is a symptom.
There can be no whitewash. There can be no whitewash at the White House.
That's a clip from A Work in Progress, produced by Marie Sullivan and billed as a Danny Schechter self-dissection. Danny went on to work as a television producer at ABC's 2020, where he won 2 Emmy Awards, and at the newly launched CNN. He wrote 12 books, including The More You Watch, The Less You Know. He was also a leading activist and journalist against apartheid in South Africa, making 6 documentaries about Nelson Mandela and producing South Africa Now. To pursue his anti-apartheid work, he left corporate media to lead MediaChannel.org and Global Vision with Rory O'Connor, who will join us in a minute. At Global Vision, they produced the groundbreaking television series South Africa Now, which was broadcast on over 150 public television stations in the United States and 16 other countries, including Mozambique. This is a clip from the opening of the show in November of 1990. We'll play that clip in a moment. Again, Danny Schechter died Thursday at the age of 72. In January, he had just published a new book titled When South Africa Called, We Answered, How International Solidarity Helped Topple Apartheid. Well, we remember his work today with 2 of his closest friends. But first, we're going to go to the beginning of South Africa Now.
Global Vision presents the television news magazine of Southern Africa. News. Views. Frontline focus. In-depth analysis. Covering the coverage. Cultural features. This week, South Africa Now reports these stories. Remember the song Sun City? It was about the homeland of Bapu Tatswana, the scene of newly reported human rights abuses. We'll explain.
I mean, if you look at Bapu Tatswana, it's a mirror of South Africa. The democratic functioning doesn't exist at all in that government.
Covering South Africa, ABC News blasts Nelson Mandela. We'll dissect the report.
While things like a new constitution and the right to vote are vital concerns, they sometimes seem secondary to more urgent needs.
Nobody's helping us.
Not even the man such high and perhaps unrealistic hopes were pinned on.
And in our culture section, from Zimbabwe, the sounds of the Bundu Boys. All of these stories and more on South Africa Now. But first, the uncensored news with Thandeka Gabuli and Philip Tomlinson.
Again, that was the beginning of the South Africa Now program that people watched on public television around this country and in many different countries around the world. Rory O'Connor is with us here in New York, co-founder of the TV and film production company Global Vision, with Danny Schechter, where they made the TV series to South Africa Now, and another one called Rights and Wrongs, Human Rights Television, as well as many documentaries about Nelson Mandela, including Mandela in America. And in Durban, South Africa, Anant Singh is with us, highly acclaimed South African filmmaker who's produced more than 80 films, including the feature film Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom, in 2013, based on Nelson Mandela's autobiography. He brought Danny Schechter to South Africa to produce a behind-the-scenes documentary on the making of that film, and they worked together on other films as well, including Countdown to Freedom, which documented the first democratic elections in South Africa, and Hero for All Seasons, which they produced as a tribute to Mandela when he stepped down as president in 1999. Anant Singh is responsible for many of the anti-apartheid films made in South Africa, including Serafina, which tells the story of the 1976 Soweto uprisings and stars Whoopi Goldberg and Miriam Makeba, and Cry, the Beloved Country, starring James Earl Jones and Alfre Woodard. On Friday, Anant Singh remembered his friend, Danny Schechter, with an article published online, a tribute to Danny Schechter. Anant Singh and Rory O'Connor, welcome to Democracy Now! Anant Singh, first your reflections on Danny Schechter's life and career.
Well, you know, he was a remarkable human being, and you've just captured the news dissector moments as part of his early life on radio. But he was such a passionate person about radio and about telling stories and telling the stories with truth. And I think that was the thing that really captivated me. He was very humble and very passionate, and very aggressively passionate in a way that I've never seen. And I think that he had such a joy in telling stories and being honest about it. And that was the beginning of it, and thereafter we collaborated on so many things together. And to have Danny now gone, and to have the legacy of all the material that he produced, whether it's writing, on film, books, is a celebration of his life. And I think we should remember him for all of these many achievements that he contributed to liberation and democracy all around the world.
You had just spoken to him last Sunday, the Sunday before yesterday?
Yes, you know, I was in New York on the 4th of this month, and he came over to a private screening I held of a film that I just produced. He watched the film with me. We chatted about it. We talked about how he was feeling. You know, I did sense that he was in some pain, but you would never know it. You know, it was a miserable day in New York, and he wanted to come out and watch the movie. And then we chatted about his health, and he did indicate that he was having some difficulties. But you know, he was always so upbeat, and you know, on Sunday, I thought, you know, I'd sent him a few emails, and he was always very quick to respond. And he hadn't responded to an email in 2 days, and I just decided, let me give him a call. And I spoke to him, and it was a very quick conversation, and I sensed from that he was in difficulties, and but at the same time, my son was with me, and he's 12, and he and my son had a very good relationship, and Kian had spoke to him also to say hi and wishing him well. So it was a very poignant moment when on Thursday we found out that he had passed on.
Rory O'Connor, your life and Danny's have been intermeshed for decades. We just played that clip from South Africa now, that public television watchers who watched in the 80s and 90s knew very well. Talk about, though, how significant that show being on public television was, the struggle for it to be there and what happened after.
Well, it was a great struggle to get it on the air, and one of the first things that surprised us the most was that certain, let's say, institutions that we thought would be supportive and would be our allies, for example, the public broadcasting system, PBS, instead rejected the program when we brought it to them because it was avowedly anti-apartheid. So the reaction that PBS gave to us was, we can't put this program on the air because you're not journalists, you're advocates. So right from the very beginning, we were branded with this scarlet A, if you will. We didn't see it that way. We saw the struggle for liberation in South Africa. And let's remember, you know, this was decades ago. There was a white minority racist regime that ran that whole country and was oppressing literally millions and millions of people. So we saw this as a great moral crusade. But we also saw it as a wonderful journalistic opportunity, a story that needed to be told, and that largely wasn't being told, at least here in the West, by what's now called the mainstream media. So we were moved to try and prod them. You know, both Danny and I worked in the so-called mainstream media, he at ABC and CNN, as you mentioned. So we knew these places from the inside, and what we knew was that they responded much more to competition than to criticism. So rather than stand outside and criticize them, we decided let's start a program and do just a few shows to goad the networks into doing what they should have been doing already, which is covering this wonderful story.
And even if the network rejected it, more than 150 public television stations took it.
Well, you know, as you know, I'm sure from your own program and distribution, it is possible to circumvent PBS. It's a lot easier to work with PBS if they'll have you. But if they won't have you, you still can go station to station to the hundreds of public television stations.
And talk about the significance of the footage that you got from South Africa that no one saw anywhere else.
Well, you know, again, we were on public television, and they had very high technical standards, right? And we were getting footage from all over the place. Now, one point I want to make very early on.
This is, of course, all during the period that Nelson Mandela is in prison.
When we started the program, Nelson Mandela had been in prison for decades, literally, and had not been seen. So also we had the problem of doing a television show with the leader of the liberation movement who nobody had seen him for literally more than 20 years. There are a lot of challenges, though. One of the main ones is that we were not allowed into South Africa. We were banned. We could not get visas. So we had to figure out, how can we cover this country thousands of miles away that we can't even get into? And so we were forced by necessity into creating a new way of reporting, and it's one that actually informed all of our work ever since, and it was what we call inside-out journalism. So we began sending cameras into South Africa, very cheap, not even professional video cameras. But we thought that some image, some picture is better than no picture. And that's what we ended up putting on the air, was footage that was shot by South Africans and then would be sent to New York, where we would put the program together.
The South African apartheid regime objecting every step of the way?
Every step of the way. Now, there were many people, not, as I said, American broadcasters, but the Irish and the Scandinavians and the British were covering, the English were covering this on almost a weekly basis. We got footage from them. We also got a lot of support from people who worked for the mainstream American networks, who were frustrated with the fact that the American networks were shooting a lot of footage, but we're not putting it on the air. And so we got a lot of help from people on the sly, if you will.
And Anat Singh, the digitized archive of South Africa Now has just been digitized by Yale University and now is residing in South Africa?
That's correct. And, you know, we want to have it as a platform to celebrate all of the content that was all banned in South Africa, as Rory has mentioned, and to be able to let South Africans have access to this, because I think that is what Rory and Danny wanted. And I think this was such an important part of our liberation, because it was a time when, again, as Rory said, the democracy of the world was not really interested in South Africa, but this content and the cultural boycott, all the things that you now know as daily information, was unavailable. And I think the show South Africa Now was a very important turning point to the awareness of what was going on in South Africa. So we're very pleased that one, Danny and Rory put this together, and more importantly, that it is available today for people to know what really happened.
Well, Anand Singh and Rory O'Connor, we have to break, but we're going to come back and hear Danny Schechter confronting or interviewing Henry Kissinger. Stay with us.